So what effective teams do right is, first of all, they make sure that the environment in which they operate is psychologically safe. What it means is that people aren't likely to self-censor and not tell you what you need to know. They're much more likely to be forthcoming with the information they have, with the mistakes they make, and say, you know what, I'll fess up. I've done something wrong. Let's learn from the experience. Or here's something that I think you need to take on board. I know you're more senior than I am, but hey, if we're going to go forward, here's what I think you need to take on board. And that's a big deal. It's been very extensively studied within aviation and medicine. And aviation has gotten it far more right, I think, than medicine has. And those industries have been extensively studied because these are industries where you deal with life and death issues in a way that you don't in most organizations. But most organizations I've worked with, they suffer from the same lack of safety, right? People just won't speak out because they don't feel safe. They're too new, so they won't speak out. It's too competitive an environment. Or when they own up to mistakes, the fear is that they might be penalized for it in some way, shape, or other. So that's number one, right? So you must make sure that where you work, that place is a psychologically safe space. It's okay to talk. So number two, effective teams have a really good sense of purpose. Not just that, but because they understand purpose so well, they're able to formulate criteria that allow people to make choices. Again, if you look at the military, you've got some good ways in which that can work, right? So they've got something very interesting called the 1-up, 2-up rule, whereby in the military, if we go to a war zone, if I'm in charge of you, I'll tell you what I need you to do. And then I go 1-up, I tell you why that's important to me, how it fits within my narrative. I don't leave it there, but I go 2-up. So I tell you what I want you to do. I tell you why doing that well matters to me, how it helps me out, and I tell you how it matters to the person that I report to. And so if I were taken out, God forbid, you still know what to do, you know what storyline you're part of. Now, very few organizations in general, I think, have that strong a sense of purpose, that clarity. But if you want to get a team to work effectively as quickly as they can, that's really important to get right. Number three, you must give some very careful thought to the balance between harmony and performance. So if you had to put your money either in making sure people get along or making sure people can perform, where would you put the emphasis? If you look at the research on teams, it's pretty clear that the emphasis should always be really on performance. And it's interesting because most people assume that the better people get along, the better they'll perform. And the problem, of course, is that empirically we have very little evidence for this. What we do have evidence for is almost the opposite. That if people perform well, then harmony will often follow as a result. And so it's really important to give people not only clarity of purpose in a psychologically safe space, but it gives people a really clear indication as to what performance means, how it will be measured, and give them the resources they need to perform. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants to be part of a success story. And it's really important to allow them to make that kind of progress. So if you have a team that needs to hit the ground running, those are the three things you must get right. Psychological safety, purpose, and a ruthless focus on performance. If you get those right, then I think you've got a pretty good chance to succeed pretty quickly, right? The longer you stick with ambiguity or with trying to get people to simply get along, I think the slower that the process is likely to be. In sports, you see quite a few examples of teams that comprise one or two real superstars, and if you look at very different industries, investment banking, you've got something very similar. In law firms, lawyers often talk about rainmakers. These are people that make a lot of money for the firm, but are almost impossible to work with. So the question is, well, how do you work with them? Well, I suppose the first question is, do you want to work with them? And I think in general, what you'll find is that teams can be surprisingly forgiving or tolerant of prima donnas, though they don't like it, provided the prima donnas bring in the goods. As soon as performance starts to start to taper off a little bit, then these are the first people they'll go for. So there is a certain tolerance level, but only when times are good. When times aren't so good, they'll often start to take revenge on people just like it. But there may also be a point where you draw a line in the sense saying, well, we don't care how much he or she brings in. At the end of the day, he or she makes this environment so destructive, so unsafe psychologically, such a miserable place to be. It's just not working for the rest of us. And so teams need to decide for themselves where they want to draw that line if they do. I think one thing that can actually help quite well is for teams to become a little bit more comfortable with giving feedback. Okay. Now, you rarely see this, but wouldn't it be nice if we were part of an organization where I could say, Jack, Jane, doesn't matter, here's something you did yesterday. I've got a bit of feedback for you. Would you be okay if I gave that to you? Just to check in. So you ask for permission first and you give it. Or for me to say, Mary, there's something I tried to do this morning. I'm not sure if it worked. Are you okay giving me a bit of feedback? The underlying idea is that you give the feedback for the right reason. The right reason being more important than either you or I. It's what we're here to do, which is why a sense of purpose is so important. Most places are very, very poor at giving feedback like that. They wait for the 360s when it's far too late, or personal development plans, whatever it might be. But if we were to develop a bit more competence on giving feedback, which isn't all that hard to do, I think would help teams deal with very difficult individuals. Because you're told, if it's not working, you're told. And you need to expect to receive it in turn. And that doesn't mean that it will change behaviors necessarily, but once you've been told in a quasi-public environment, you really can't continue, in good faith with the same behaviors. There's a wonderful story of the coach of the basketball team in Duke University. Now, Duke has always been very well known for its basketball. It's performed extraordinarily well over the years. And he went on radio recently to explain what he thinks has made his team so successful so consistently. And there's something that he does that he swears by. He says, when things seem to get a little rough around the edges, what we do is we take our players and our coaches and our staff and myself into a room. And we stay there for as long as it takes. And all we do, he says, is we tell each other what someone else does that irritates us. Because again, once you've been told, there's no real excuse to continue the same behaviors. Now, the reason he gets away with this is because he operates to a very simple idea. The idea being, let's make sure that Duke doesn't get beaten by Duke. Let's make sure that IMI doesn't get beaten by IMI. Let's make sure we don't beat ourselves. Now, a lot of organizations probably can't get away with that sort of straightforwardness. It's a little bit easier to do in sports, a little bit easier to do in the military. But wouldn't it be nice if we came a little bit closer to that? It'd be okay to say, you know what, there's something you just did. Do you mind if I give you a bit of feedback? I think simple things like this can make a tremendous difference to the effectiveness of teams, particularly when you deal with very good but very difficult individuals.